Hey, what's going on, guys? I just want to mention something really quick before we do get started. Armored Core 6 is finally released. The hype is real. So excited to play the game. By the time this video is out, I should be live on Twitch streaming my experience. I'll be playing it all day, every day, and I do plan on making content on that game. So this video might be the last Elden Ring video that we make for a little bit. Obviously not going to go a long period of time without making Elden Ring content. Don't want to neglect my subscribers. That would be stupid. But as for today, we're going to be ranking all 17 of the fire-based weapons, which is funny that there's only 17. We just did the holy-based weapons, and there are 30 of those. So it's kind of weird that there's like twice as many holy-based weapons compared to fire ones, but it's cool. Doesn't really matter. As always, it's going to be a PvE-based list. If you have your own opinions, if you have something you agree with or disagree with, just let me know down in the comments. But yeah, that's the way. Let's just get into it. Starting off right at the bottom, we have the Devourer's Scepter. Now, this weapon is a great hammer that has very nice range, decent damage, and good scalings, which is like the recipe for success, except its weapon skill, Devourer of Worlds, is complete doo-doo trash, because for 35 FP, you basically do nothing. It's a long casting animation, you get no hyper armor, consumes a lot of FP, you do next to no damage, it's a small AoE, and you're supposed to get healed, but the healing effect is just so negligible, there's not even point to it at all. Now, it does scale when hitting multiple enemies, but even then, it's still shit and situational. Something like the Blasphemous Blade just does exactly what this does, just 1,000 times better. And it's so unfortunate because this is one of the coolest looking weapons in the entire game from Software. Please buff it. At number 16, we have the Giant's Red Braid. Now, this weapon does actually have some pretty nice scalings, a B scaling in Strength and Faith, which is cool, but it's a whip. So it's going to have very slow movesets, just as slow as Colossal Swords, but they do just as much damage as Straight Swords, which is annoying. Now, they do have nice range, and they do stagger pretty well, but it definitely still doesn't make up for that damage loss that you are really lacking with whip options themselves. But the worst thing about this weapon itself is its weapon skill, Flame Dance. For 25 FP, you get stuck in this long animation for the most part, because you can actually cancel it at the beginning and towards the end, which is kind of useless because that entire middle part, which is the longest part of the animation, you cannot cancel it at all. So you get stuck there and you're just going to get hit every single time. And it does terrible damage. Like, it's just really, really bad damage. Now, the only positive things I could say about it is that against smaller types of enemies, it does stun lock them, so they can pretty much be an entire guaranteed combo, and it has nice range, but the damage is so bad to the point that the Magma Whip Candlestick does the exact same thing, but just better. So there's not much of a point to this weapon at all. Number 15, we have a Torch Pole. Now, this thing is basically a torch on a pole, if you didn't already know, and it's barely even a fire-based weapon because it only gets 75 fire damage, and there's no way to actually improve that as well because it only gets a quality scaling, C scaling, and strength and dexterity. But the reason as to why it's not at the bottom is because it's a spear, which has a decent moveset, and actually has some pretty nice range, but like the total overall damage is just mid scalings. Yeah, you can't buff it, can't infuse it. You get charge fourth as its weapon skill as well. I don't know, not much to really say about this weapon. Number 14, we have the Inquisitor's Garandol. Now, this is a faith-based spear that actually does get some blood loss build up, which obviously sounds really good, but it's still not that good of a weapon because only 50 blood loss build up is barely even noticeable. You're only going to proc bleed like maybe like once in a fight, which is still decent, I guess, but this thing looks so cool, and it should have a unique weapon skill, but it doesn't because it only gets charge fourth, which is not that unique. It's highly annoying. I just wish that this thing had a unique skill, maybe had like a D or a C scaling in Arcane as well. That would be really nice because you can actually improve the blood loss build up, because that's what is definitely lacking at the moment, actual good weapon skill and more of that blood loss build up to make it a bit more unique, but it still isn't too bad of a weapon. I just wish it has had more going for it. Number 13, we have a Troll's Hammer. Now, this is a colossal weapon, but they tend to have pretty shitty movesets, but they have some nice poise damage. Now, this is going to be more of a physical type of weapon because it has obviously more physical damage, and it actually gets a B scaling in strength compared to its D scaling in faith. However, the cool thing about this weapon is that it cannot be infused, but you can buff it, which is nice because it already has that split fire damage, so you can actually add another fire buff on top of it to just make it do even more damage. However, there's no fire-based buff incantation, so if you actually wanted to use a weapon buff for a spell, you're probably using Electrify Armament. Now you're doing 3 different types of damage, which is not great in terms of the split damage in this game. If there was that fire buff incantation, I'd probably like it a lot more, but I guess the main reason as to why it's going to get lower on the list is because it only gets Troll's Roar, which is just not a unique weapon skill at all, and it's not even that good of a weapon skill. Has some decent poise damage, but it would benefit of something actually unique. Number 12, we have Vike's Warspear. Now, this is just going to get lower on the list because it's more of a PvP-based weapon and it's been like balanced as such because its weapon skill doesn't really do that great of damage. The weapon itself doesn't do that great of total overall damage. And it has pretty poor range, but obviously it's still a great spear, so it has a decent moveset. And for 14 FP, the weapon skill isn't too bad, But if Madness actually worked in PvE, it would definitely end up being a lot higher on this list. But because it doesn't, I can't really put anything higher than this. Number 11, we have the Grafted Dragon. Now, this is a fist-based weapon, which they tend to be pretty decent in terms of like their movesets and whatnot. But unfortunately, it's a fist weapon that cannot be two-handed, which sucks a lot. I don't know why you cannot at least two-hand this thing. Doesn't have to do the power stance combo. At least it's two-handed so I can just do more damage. That would be really cool. But its weapon skill, Bear Witness, isn't actually too bad. You can do a whole bunch of damage with it. Has a relatively quick animation, and the recovery animations are really quick. You can basically just use it and just roll straight away. Now, the range of the AoE itself isn't really too good. You have to be right on top of the enemy, but the amount of damage you can do definitely makes it worth it. Now, another annoying thing about this weapon is the range. You'd think it would actually have some decent range with that weird dragon model, as long as it actually is, but no, that whole model doesn't actually have a hitbox. You're basically only punching with your fist with that type of range, which is just very silly. So definitely let it be two-handed and probably increase the range a little bit. That would be nice. At number 10, we have the Magma Whip Candlestick. Now, as I was mentioning with the Giant's Red Braid, this one is very similar. It's going to be your dexterity-based one, whereas the Giant's Red Braid is going to be your strength-based one. But the weapon skills kind of work the same in that you just spin your weapon around and you can just do a bunch of damage that way. But with the Magma Whip Candlestick, it's actually good damage, whereas the Giant's Red Braid is not. And you only consume 5 FP every single time that you spin it around. So if you actually want to cancel it, you can do it after every single spin, and you only consume 5 FP. Whereas for the Giant's Red Braid, if you want to cancel the animation, you've used your entire 25 FP. Now, you cannot stun lock as good with this weapon compared to the Giant's Red Braid, nor are you going to have as much range, but the amount of damage you can do with that lava you just leave on the ground, and the fact that you can cancel it after every single swing just makes it the much better option. At number 9, we have the Cranial Vessel Candlestand. Now, this is a great hammer, which they have really good movesets, amazing poise damage. This thing actually has really good range and good total overall damage. I think it gets the highest damage out of all the other great hammers with that B scaling in strength and faith. And its weapon skill, for only 15 FP, you can do a whole bunch of damage. Unfortunately, the only reason as to why it's not an S tier is because the recovery animations are so incredibly long. Now, this is kind of the opposite of the Grafted Dragon. Both skills work very much the same, but the Grafted Dragon, you can roll straight away. This one, you're just staying there for an extra 3 seconds. And the reason as to why you're staying there for an extra 3 seconds is for those little lava balls to spew out of the weapon itself, which they do terrible damage, so there's not much of a point to them. If it just removed that part entirely, it could easily be one of the best weapons in the entire game because the damage itself is amazing. For only 15 FP, it's really good. And you do get a follow-up as well, but by the time you get to that follow-up after waiting for that entire animation to finish, it's just way too long. You're going to get hit every single time. If that has cut that animation by half or just removed it, please, honestly, just do that. It'll be amazing. At number 8, we have the Eleonora's Pole Blade. Now, just recently, I did an entire playthrough using the Eleonora's Pole Blade and the Rivers of Blood to try and compare both of them to see which one I actually did prefer. I thought the Eleonora's was way better than what it actually was because, yeah, the damage is not that great. Now, it's still a twin blade. It gets okay movesets. You get some nice bleed build up as well. And its weapon skill only consumes 17 FP for the entire combo. And it gets some nice blood loss build up. You get some nice poise damage. But the damage itself is just not that good. It just doesn't really tick for that much damage, which is a shame because you get stuck in this very long animation that's very easy for people to punish, especially if you're a larger enemy that cannot get staggered, and you have to be at melee distance obviously to do damage. So I just feel like it should be doing more damage for their amount of range and how long the animation actually is itself. But the reason as to why it still gets an A tier is because the poise damage is still really good. I think you get about 40 poise damage for the entire combo, and for only 17 FP, the amount of blood loss buildup you can do is nice, and it does stun lock smaller enemies as well. So against those smaller types of enemies, it could be one of the best weapon skills in the entire game, but the damage itself is just not that great. At number 7, we have the Rivers of Blood Katana. Now, this thing, as I was saying with the Eleonora's Pole Blade, just performs better than that weapon because you actually get more range, you don't get stuck in a longer animation, and you actually just do a lot more damage as well. Now, I think the Eleonora's Pole Blade probably has more of a use because that weapon skill doesn't really work like many other things, maybe Spinning Slash. But with the Rivers of Blood, its weapon skill is basically just like Double Slash, but you just get a little bit more range. I actually prefer Double Slash though because it consumes a lot less FP, and you can just do more damage with it as well. I like to pair it alongside the Nagakibo, and it just makes it like a better version of the Rivers of Blood. But it does have a little slight use due to that extended range. It is nice to just be at a certain distance and still be able to just do a little bit of damage and a little bit of blood loss build up that way. But the fact that it is outclassed by other katanas in this game means that it can't really get anything higher than this, but it still is a very good weapon and a very easy weapon to go through the game with. At number 6, we have the Magma Blade. Now, this is a curved sword that does get some decent damage, and its weapon skill, Magma Shower, is basically the exact same thing as Spitting Slash, but it just leaves a lot more lava on the ground, or actually leaves lava on the ground to make it just do more total overall damage, which is really good. And it can just melt a whole bunch of enemies that way because that lava can tick for a whole bunch. It does scale with that Faith stat as well, which it gets a C scaling at Faith, which isn't too bad. Now, the fact that its weapon skill is not that unique is going to be the reason as to why I'm not going to get higher on the list, because I would just rather have the Bandit's Curved Sword Flame Art infused with Spinning Slash, and it'll probably end up doing just as much damage, and you'll just do twice as much, actually more than twice as much poise damage. I don't know why Magma Shower gets like less than half the amount of poise damage as Spinning Slash, even though you consume a lot more FP as well. If it had the same stance damage as Spitting Slash, it might end up getting an S tier, but at the moment, still a high A tier, which is really good. At number 5, we have the Sword of Night and Flame. Now, yes, this weapon does get that split magic damage, but for the sake of the video, I just want to highlight just the fire portion of the weapon itself. Now, the fire portion, I don't really like it as much as the magic-based version, because the magic-based version just has more range, consumes less FP, does more stance damage, and if you pair it alongside things like the Spellblade set and Terra Magica, you can just do way more damage than you can with the fire-based one. But obviously the fire-based one does have some uses because it is a nice horizontal spread, so it's good at hitting multiple enemies at once and enemies that do like to dodge around, and it still gets like amazing damage. Hence as to why it's still going to get an S tier, because the damage is still fucking cracked, and it doesn't really matter how much faith that you do have, it still does insane damage. I just did a playthrough with this thing recently, testing out both of the skills themselves, and even like at 30, 40 faith, you are still just melting everything. It's just that good. Now, the reason as to why it's not going to get a little bit higher is because it still is a longer animation, and it does consume 32 FP, which is a decent amount as well, but it still is really amazing, and it will still make the entire game incredibly easy. Number 4, we have the Magma Worm's Scale Sword. Now, this is a curved greatsword that does get some very nice movesets. They're incredibly quick. This thing gets a B scaling in both strength and faith, so its total overall damage can be very nice. But the best thing about this weapon is its skill, Magma Guillotine. For 20 FP, you do this jumping attack that gets like infinite hyper armor, come crashing to the ground, do a whole bunch of damage, and you do get a follow-up attack for an additional 10 FP that does even more damage. You can just melt enemies really quickly, does stagger pretty well on top of that. Now, the range of this skill itself is going to be its main drawback, but if you end up landing with it, it is going to melt everything in the entire game because it does that much damage. Number 3, we have the Godslayer's Greatsword. Now, this is a colossal sword that does actually have more of a dexterity scaling, does get a C scaling and faith as well, but it does have a very unique moveset in that it has a whole bunch of diagonal swipes, which is very, very cool because normally colossal swords just get horizontal swipes, and diagonal swipes is better for hit detection. This thing does get some nice range, and its weapon skill, the Queen's Black Flame, does insane damage. For 15 FP, you pretty much just do this Black Flame swiping attack, and obviously Black Flame does that cool percentile damage over time, so it can melt a bunch of bosses incredibly quickly, and you do get a follow-up attack as well for another additional 15 FP. You get nice hyper armor, has some decent range, it can send enemies flying as well. It's just an overall solid weapon, and you can't really go wrong with this bad boy right here. Number 2, Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear. This thing is a great spear that has incredible range, has a solid moveset. You get some nice bloodlust build up, very good strength and arcane scaling, and its weapon skill is just absolutely ridiculous. For 20 FP, you can just rain down a whole bunch of blood, stagger enemies really well, do a nice amount of damage, insane bloodlust build up. You can do your follow-up inputs as well. This has a very nice AoE on top of that. It's just good overall. I'm pretty sure you guys know about this thing already. I've already talked about it a whole bunch. It's just amazing. And at number 1, we have the Blasphemous Blade. I don't think I need to talk about this one as well. Like almost every single ranking video I have, Blasphemous Blade is just always there. It's always there at number 1 because it's just amazing. It's a great sword, so it has a decent moveset, gets very good scalings, you can get decent total overall damage, and its weapon skill, Taker's Flame, can just cheese literally everything, goes through enemies, has very good damage, you have insane health regen on top of that, and every single time you do get a kill, even if the weapon is in your offhand, you don't even have it equipped, it still gives you health back. It's just incredible. Definitely one of the best weapons in the entire game, if not the best. Anyway, that pretty much concludes it for that one. As I was saying earlier, please do follow me on Twitch because I will be streaming Armored Core 6. We'll be playing it a whole bunch. We'll be making more content for that as well. So if you are excited for that, please do subscribe. And yeah, I'll catch you guys around. Bye.